the freezing November wind cut through the streets of North End Boston, carrying with it the familiar aroma of marinara sauce and fresh bread emanating from the traditional Italian restaurants in the area. Golden leaves danced across the cobblestone sidewalks, creating a crispy carpet under the feet of pedestrians, hurrying to escape the cold that announced Massachusetts's harsh winter. In the imposing 3-story Victorian mansion on Hanover Street, Vincent Vinnie Torino watched from the window of his second-floor office, his fingers drumming impatiently on the solid mahogany desk. At 45 years old, Vinnie was a man of medium stature, but his presence dominated any environment. His dark hair, already speckled with gray threads at the temples, was always perfectly slicked back, and his dark brown eyes had the ability to intimidate with a simple look. He wore an impeccable Armani suit, even while at home, a constant demonstration of power and status. "Where the hell is that woman?" muttered Vinnie, checking the gold Rolex on his wrist. It was exactly 7:30 a.m., and the new housekeeper should have arrived half an hour ago. He had been very clear about punctuality during the interview the previous week. The Torino mansion was a symbol of power in the heart of Boston's Italian neighborhood. With its characteristic red bricks, ornate, white-framed windows, and meticulously maintained front garden, the property stood out even on a street full of impressive historic houses. Inside, each room reflected the refined taste and wealth of its owner. Italian marble floors, imported crystal chandeliers, priceless antique furniture, and carefully selected artwork. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, cutting through the morning silence. Vinnie descended the marble stairs with heavy steps, his Italian leather soles echoing through the entrance hall. Upon opening the heavy oak door, he found himself face to face with a small, thin woman, approximately 35 years old, with dark brown hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a worn brown wool coat and carried a modest handbag. "Señor Torino?" she asked with an evident Hispanic accent, but speaking in English. "I'm Maria Santos. Sorry for the delay, the bus." 45 minutes late?" interrupted Vinnie, his voice loaded with irritation. "I clearly said I would start at 7 in the morning. 7, not 7:45. Maria lowered her eyes, her hands trembling slightly, not just from the cold, but from the evident tension in her boss's voice. "I'm sorry, senor. The bus broke down on Commonwealth Avenue, and we had to wait for another one. It won't happen again." Vinnie studied her for a moment, noting the simple but clean clothes, the worn but well-maintained shoes, and especially the determined look in her brown eyes despite the evident nervousness. There was something about her that reminded him of his own mother, who had worked as a housekeeper when he was a child, before he built his empire. "Come in," he said finally, stepping away from the door. "I'll show you the house and explain your responsibilities. And Maria," he added, his voice taking on a threatening tone, "this is your only chance. I don't tolerate incompetence or delays." Maria nodded vigorously as she followed Vinnie through the entrance hall. Her eyes widened at seeing the grandeur of the interior, the crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, the curved staircases with carved mahogany railings, the paintings in golden frames adorning the walls. It was a completely different world from the small 2-bedroom apartment in East Boston that she shared with her 3 children. "The house has 3 floors, began Vinnie, walking through the main living room. "This floor has the living room, dining room, kitchen, my office, and a powder room. The second floor has 4 bedrooms, including the master suite, and 3 bathrooms. The third floor has 2 additional bedrooms and a storage attic." Maria mentally noted every detail, observing the expensive furniture, authentic Persian rugs, and silk curtains that framed the large windows. Everything was impeccably clean and organized, evidence of the meticulous work of previous housekeepers. "Your responsibilities include general cleaning, laundry, preparation of simple meals, and maintaining organization," continued Vinnie, stopping in the gourmet kitchen equipped with state-of-the-art stainless steel appliances. "You work Monday through Friday, from 7 to 4. Saturdays only if I specifically request it." "Understood, senor," replied Maria, secretly admiring the dream kitchen. It was 3 times larger than her entire kitchen at home. "There are some non-negotiable rules," said Vinny, his voice becoming more severe. "First, you don't touch anything in my office, not even to clean. Second, when my son Anthony is home, you keep your distance unless I say otherwise. Third, you don't ask questions about my business or visitors. And fourth," he stopped and stared at her directly, "you don't talk about anything you see or hear in this house with anyone, ever." Maria swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the intensity in his eyes. "Yes, senor, I understand perfectly." "I hope you really understand," said Vinny. "The last 7 housekeepers didn't understand. That's why they're no longer here." The comment made Maria wonder what exactly had happened to her predecessors, but she knew better than to ask questions. She desperately needed this job. Her oldest son, Carlos, 16 years old, was getting involved with the wrong crowd in the neighborhood, and she hoped to be able to move the family to a better place with the salary Vinny offered, significantly more than any other cleaning job she had managed to find. "You can start with the living room," instructed Vinny. "The cleaning supplies are in the laundry room closet in the basement. And Maria," he added when she headed to get the supplies, "remember, perfection is the minimum acceptable here." While Maria went down to the basement, Vinny went up to his office where a pile of documents awaited his attention. His business, a combination of legitimate and illegitimate operations that included restaurants, construction, loans, and other less conventional activities, required constant supervision. As one of the main capos of the Torino family in Boston, he controlled a significant portion of operations in North End and adjacent areas. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Vinny," said the familiar voice of his lieutenant, Tony Marcelli. "We have a problem with the collection on Revere Street. The guy is 3 weeks behind." "How much?" asked Vinny, his attention immediately focused on business. "15,000. Says the restaurant is going through difficulties because of the construction on the street." Vinny sighed, massaging his temples. Problems like this were constant in his line of work. "Give him 1 more week. If he doesn't pay, you know what to do." "Understood, boss." After hanging up, Vinny returned his attention to the papers, but was interrupted by the sound of something breaking downstairs. His eyes narrowed and he descended the stairs quickly, finding Maria on the living room floor, collecting the pieces of a crystal vase that had fallen from the side table. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the room. Maria looked up, clearly distressed. "I'm sorry, senor. I was cleaning the table and accidentally bumped into it. I'll pay for the vase, I promise." Vinny looked at the fragments scattered across the floor. It was a Waterford vase that had cost more than $500. "You'll pay?" He laughed bitterly. "With what money? That vase costs more than you earn in a month." "Please, senor," pleaded Maria, still on her knees collecting the pieces. "It was an accident. I'm usually very careful. It won't happen again." "You're right about that," said Vinny coldly. "Because you're fired. Get your things and get out of my house." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Senor Torino, I need this job. I have 3 children to feed. I can work without pay for a week to compensate for the vase." "I don't care," replied Vinny, inflexible. "I said perfection was the minimum acceptable. You failed on the first day. Leave." Maria stood up slowly, her legs trembling. "Senor, please!" "Get out!" shouted Vinny, his voice echoing throughout the entire house. With tears streaming down her face, Maria grabbed her coat and purse, heading for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "May God bless you, Senor Torino. I hope that one day you understand what it means to need compassion." The door closed with a soft sound, leaving Vinny alone in the living room. He looked at the remaining fragments of the vase, feeling a strange pang of something he couldn't identify. He quickly pushed the feeling away, reminding himself that showing weakness was not an option in his world. That afternoon, while Vinny worked in his office, his son Anthony arrived from school. At 8 years old, Anthony was a miniature version of his father. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, and a confident posture that defied his age. He attended an exclusive private school in Back Bay, where he was known both for his intelligence and his tendency to intimidate smaller classmates. "Hi, Dad," said Anthony, appearing in the office doorway. "Hi, champ," replied Vinny, smiling for the first time that day. "How was school?" "Good. Where's the new housekeeper? I saw that the house wasn't arranged as usual." Vinny sighed. I had to fire her. She broke a vase on the first day. Anthony nodded approvingly. Good. You can't let people think they can be careless with our things. The boy's response momentarily surprised Vinny. There was something in the way Anthony spoke that sounded strangely familiar and disturbing. It was like hearing an echo of himself, but coming from a child who should be worried about toys and cartoons, not demonstrations of power and control. Anthony, said Vinny carefully, do you understand why I fired her? Of course, replied the boy confidently. She disrespected our family by breaking something valuable. You had to show that we're strong and that we don't accept disrespect. That's how we maintain respect, right? Vinny was silent for a moment, observing his son. There was pride in his eyes, but also something more, a coldness that shouldn't exist in such a young child. Go do your homework, he said finally. We'll talk at dinner. As Anthony left the office, Vinny leaned back in his chair, an uncomfortable feeling settling in his chest. For the first time in years, he questioned whether he was doing the right thing. But he quickly pushed those thoughts away. In his world, hesitation was synonymous with weakness, and weakness was synonymous with death. Outside, snow began to fall softly over Boston, covering the North End streets with a white blanket that, temporarily, made everything seem pure and new. But inside the Torino mansion, the seeds of a much deeper transformation were being planted, although Vinny didn't know it yet. Night fell quickly, as always happened in late November in Massachusetts. Vinny dined alone with Anthony in the elegant dining room, served a meal he had prepared himself, a culinary talent inherited from his Italian mother. While they ate, Anthony told about his day at school, casually mentioning how he had put a boy in his place during recess. What do you mean by that? Asked Vinny, cutting his steak. He was messing with a smaller boy, so I told him to stop. When he didn't stop, I pushed him and said that if he continued, he would have to deal with me, explained Anthony, with the same naturalness with which he would talk about the weather. Vinny nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. On one hand, he was satisfied that his son was defending the weaker ones. On the other, the casual way Anthony described the use of physical intimidation bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. After dinner, while Anthony watched television in the living room, Vinny locked himself in his office to take care of more business. The phone rang several times. Reports from his lieutenants, problems that needed to be solved, decisions that only he could make. It was the price of being at the top of the hierarchy, constant responsibility, and the need to maintain absolute control over all aspects of his operations. Around 10 at night, after putting Anthony to bed, Vinny served himself a glass of 25-year-old Irish whiskey and sat in his favorite leather armchair in the living room. The house was silent, except for the tick-tock of the antique clock in the hall and the wind whistling through the windows. He thought about Maria's words before leaving. I hope that one day you understand what it means to need compassion. The phrase bothered him more than he would like to admit. Vinny had grown up on the hard streets of Boston, son of Italian immigrants who fought to survive in a country that didn't always welcome them with open arms. He knew what it meant to need compassion. He had lived it on his own skin. But somewhere along the way, between building his empire and protecting his family, he had forgotten that lesson. Or maybe he had chosen to forget it because compassion was seen as weakness in his world, and weakness could be fatal. But Anthony didn't live in that world. At least he shouldn't live in it. Vinny finished his whiskey and went up to his room, but sleep didn't come easily. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Maria, about Anthony, and about the kind of man he had become. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Boston with its temporary purity, while inside the Torino mansion, a powerful man struggled with demons he had created for himself. The first chapter of Vincent Torino's transformation had begun, although he didn't know it yet. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with the smallest moments of doubt, and on that cold November night, the seeds of change were planted in the heart of a man who had forgotten how to be human. The following Monday dawned gray and cold in Boston, with a thin layer of ice covering the sidewalks of North End. Vinny woke at 5:30 a.m., as he always did, following a military routine he had maintained for over 20 years. After a hot shower and a strong espresso prepared in his imported Italian machine, he dressed in another impeccable suit, this time a navy blue brioni with a red silk tie. At exactly 7 a.m., the doorbell rang. Vinny opened the door to find a middle-aged woman, robust, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a navy blue housekeeper's uniform and carried a small suitcase. "Mr. Torino, I'm Helen McCarthy. The agency sent me," she said with a pronounced Boston Irish accent. "Punctual. Good start," said Vinny, examining her from head to toe. Helen was approximately 50 years old, with calloused hands that evidenced decades of domestic work. Her blue eyes were direct and fearless, a quality that Vinny respected, even if he didn't necessarily appreciate it in his employees. "I have 30 years of experience, sir. I've worked for some of the most demanding families in Beacon Hill," said Helen, entering the house when Vinny stepped away from the door. "Demanding is an understatement," muttered Vinny. "I'll be direct, Helen. I fired 7 housekeepers in the last 2 months, not for incompetence, but because they didn't understand that perfection isn't a goal. It's a minimum requirement." Helen nodded, apparently not intimidated. "I understand, sir. I worked for Judge Morrison for 15 years. He had similar standards." Vinny led her through the house, explaining his expectations in meticulous detail. Every surface should shine. Every object should be exactly in its designated place. Every meal should be prepared with military precision. Helen listened attentively, asking practical questions and demonstrating a professional understanding that impressed Vinny. "The master suite bathroom must be cleaned daily," explained Vinny as they went up the stairs. "The Carrara marble is imported and expensive. Use only the specific products that are in the cabinet, nothing else." "Understood, sir," replied Helen, examining the luxurious bathroom with experienced eyes. "My son Anthony arrives from school at 3:30. He may ask for a snack, but nothing that will spoil dinner." "And Helen," Vinny stopped and stared at her. "Anthony is learning about discipline and standards. Don't spoil him." "Of course, sir." Vinny left Helen to begin her work and headed to his office where a morning full of meetings awaited him. His legitimate businesses, 3 restaurants in North End and a construction company, required constant attention, especially with the municipal inspections that seemed more frequent lately. Around 10 a.m., Tony Marcelli arrived for a meeting about a new investment in a nightclub in Somerville. Tony was a short, stocky man with a scar that went from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a reminder of a poorly resolved argument years ago. "The owner is willing to sell," reported Tony, sitting in the leather chair in front of Vinny's desk. "But he wants $800,000. It's too much for a place that can barely pay its bills." "How much does he owe us?" asked Vinny, leafing through the documents. $45,000, 3 months behind. Vinny considered the options. The club was in a prime location, perfect for money laundering, but the price was inflated. Offer $400,000 plus forgiveness of the debt. If he refuses, increase the pressure. "Understood, boss." While they discussed the details, the sound of something heavy falling echoed from downstairs, followed by a muffled curse. Vinny and Tony looked at each other. "Stay here," said Vinny, getting up abruptly. He went down the stairs quickly and found Helen in the dining room, looking at a dark stain on the Persian rug that extended under the table. Next to her, a bucket of dirty water had tipped over, creating a puddle that was spreading across the polished wooden floor. "What happened here?" demanded Vinny, his voice loaded with growing irritation. Helen straightened up, maintaining her composure. "I was moving the table to clean underneath, as you instructed. The bucket was closer than I thought." "You stained a rug worth more than $10,000, said Vinny, his voice rising in tone. "And look at the floor. That wood is 200-year-old Brazilian mahogany." "I can clean it, sir. I have special products for—" "Special products?" Vinny laughed bitterly. "Do you think special products will remove a dirty water stain from an authentic Persian rug?" Helen maintained her calm, but Vinny could see the tension in her shoulders. "Sir, in 30 years of work, I've dealt with worse situations. I can solve this." "No, you can't," said Vinny coldly. "Because you're fired. Get your things and leave." "Mr. Torino," said Helen, her voice still controlled. "This was an accident. I can pay for the rug repair if necessary. With what money? Vinny crossed his arms. You earn $15 an hour. That rug costs more than you earn in a year. Helen was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand, sir. I'll get my things. While Helen went upstairs to get her suitcase, Tony appeared in the dining room doorway. Everything okay, boss? Another incompetent, grumbled Vinny. I'll have to call the agency again. Tony looked at the stain on the rug and the puddle on the floor. Doesn't look so bad, boss. My wife has spilled worse things. Vinny shot an icy look at Tony. Your wife doesn't work for me, and if she did, she'd be fired too. Helen came down the stairs with her suitcase, stopping at the dining room door. Mr. Torino, may I give you some advice? No, replied Vinny dryly. I'll give it anyway, said Helen, her Irish voice becoming more pronounced. In 30 years of cleaning houses, I've learned that perfection is an illusion. Life is messy, sir, and the more you fight against it, the more unhappy you become. Get out of my house, said Vinny, pointing to the door. I'm already leaving. But think about what I said, especially when it comes to your son. The door closed behind Helen, leaving Vinny and Tony alone in the dining room. Tony looked at his boss, noticing the tension in his jaw. Want me to finish our conversation later? Asked Tony. No, let's finish now, said Vinny, forcing himself to concentrate on business. They returned to the office, but Vinny had difficulty concentrating. Helen's words echoed in his mind. Life is messy, especially when it comes to your son. What did she mean by that? The meeting ended around noon, and Vinny spent the rest of the afternoon taking care of paperwork and making calls. At 3:30, as always, Anthony arrived from school. The boy entered through the front door, threw his backpack on the hall floor and shouted, Where's my snack? Vinny appeared at the top of the stairs. The housekeeper left. You'll have to wait for dinner. Anthony frowned. Why? What did she do? Made a mess. Stained the dining room rug. Good, said Anthony, nodding approvingly. You can't let people think they can be careless with our things. Again, the boy's response bothered Vinny. There was something in the way Anthony talked about our things and about not letting people think certain things that sounded too mature and too cold for an 8-year-old child. Anthony, come here, said Vinny, coming down the stairs. The boy approached, and Vinny knelt to be at eye level with his son. Why do you think it was good that I fired the housekeeper? Anthony seemed confused by the question. Because she disrespected our family by being careless. You always say we have to maintain respect. And how do we maintain respect? By showing that we're strong, that we don't accept disrespect, that there are consequences when people disappoint us. Vinny studied his son's face, seeing his own philosophy reflected in the young eyes. It was exactly what he had taught Anthony, directly and indirectly over the years. But hearing those words coming from a child's mouth, they sounded different, harsher, colder. What if the person didn't mean to disrespect? What if it was just an accident? Anthony considered the question for a moment. Dad, you always say that intention doesn't matter. Only results matter. If someone causes problems even without meaning to, they still caused problems. Vinny stood up slowly, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Go do your homework. We'll talk at dinner. While Anthony went up the stairs, Vinny stood in the hall looking at the water stain that was still drying on the mahogany floor. Helen had been right about one thing. Life was messy. But in his world, mess could mean death. Rigid standards and absolute control weren't luxuries. They were survival necessities. But Anthony didn't live in that world. At least he shouldn't. That night, Vinny prepared dinner. Linguine alle vongole, a recipe his mother had taught him when he was a child. While cooking, he thought about his childhood in North End, when his family barely had money for food, let alone housekeepers. His mother, Rosa Torino, cleaned houses during the day and cooked for the family at night, always with a smile on her face, despite the difficulties. Vincenzo, she used to say in her Italian mixed with English, La vita è troppo breve per essere sempre arrabbiato. Life is too short to always be angry. But anger had become his survival tool. He had built his empire on a foundation of fear and respect, and it worked. His enemies feared him, his allies respected him, and his family lived in luxury. Why change something that worked? During dinner, Anthony told about his day at school, mentioning how he had corrected a classmate who was making a mess in the classroom. "What do you mean by corrected?" asked Vinny. "I told him to stop making noise. When he didn't stop, I said that if he continued, he would have problems with me after class." "And he stopped?" "Of course he stopped. Nobody wants problems with me." Vinny chewed slowly, observing his son. "Anthony, have you ever thought about simply asking him to stop? Without threats?" Anthony seemed genuinely confused. "Why would I do that? He wouldn't respect me. You always say that respect comes through strength." "I said that. Not in those exact words, but it's what you do. With the employees, with the people who work for you, with everyone. You show that you're strong, and they respect you." Vinny put his fork on the plate, losing his appetite. "And you think that's right?" "Of course," replied Anthony without hesitation. "That's how the world works. The strong command, the weak obey. You taught me that." After dinner, Vinny locked himself in his office, but couldn't concentrate on work. Anthony's words echoed in his mind. "You taught me that." And he had taught, not through words, but through actions. Every fired housekeeper, every demonstration of power, every moment of inflexibility. Anthony had observed everything and learned. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his sister Sophia, calling from Providence. "Vinny, how are you?" she asked, her voice loaded with familiar concern. "Fine. Why do you ask?" "Because it's Wednesday night and you sound depressed." "I know that voice." Sophia was 3 years younger than Vinny, but had always been the wiser of the two siblings. She had married an accountant and lived a quiet life in Rhode Island, far from Vinny's world. "Just work," said Vinny. "How's Anthony?" "Fine, growing up fast." "Vinny," said Sophia, her voice becoming more serious, "do you remember what Mama always said about children?" "She said many things. That they're like sponges. They absorb everything they see, especially from their parents. Do you remember?" Vinny was silent, the memory of his mother returning vividly. Rosa Torino had died when Anthony was only 3 years old, but her words of wisdom still echoed occasionally. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Vinny. "Because you're my brother and I love you, and because I worry about the kind of man Anthony is becoming." "Anthony is fine. I'm sure he is. But Vinny, have you ever stopped to think about what he's learning? Not about math or history, but about how to treat people." After Sophia hung up, Vinny sat in his office for hours, looking at a framed photo of Anthony on his desk. It was a recent photo, taken on the boy's last birthday. Anthony smiled at the camera, but there was something in his eyes, a hardness that shouldn't exist in a child. Outside, Boston slept under a blanket of fresh snow. But inside the Torino mansion, a father struggled with the realization that perhaps he was creating a monster, an even colder and more calculating version of himself. And for the first time in years, Vincent Torino wondered if the price of power was too high. The second chapter of transformation had begun, planting seeds of doubt that would soon bloom into something much bigger. Friday of the following week brought a snowstorm that covered Boston with more than 15 centimeters of fresh snow. The streets of North End were practically deserted, except for the few brave souls who ventured across the slippery sidewalks. Vinny woke earlier than normal at 5 a.m., disturbed by restless dreams about his mother and conversations he had never had with Anthony. After 3 days trying to find a new housekeeper through the agency and rejecting 4 candidates for reasons he himself was beginning to question, Vinny made a decision that surprised him. He took the business card that Maria Santos had left on the hall table the day he fired her and dialed the number. The phone rang several times before a familiar voice answered. "Allo? Maria? This is Vincent Torino." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Senor Torino? Yes, listen, I need a housekeeper again. Are you still looking for work?" Another pause, longer this time. Vinny could hear voices in the background, children speaking in Spanish, the sound of a television. "Senor," said Maria finally, her voice cautious, "you fired me for breaking a vase. Why would you call me again?" The question caught him off guard. Why was he calling? He had spent the last few days thinking about Anthony, about Helen and Sophia's words, about the kind of man he was becoming, and the kind of father he was being. Because, he said slowly, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe everyone deserves a second chance. Even me, Senor? Especially you. Maria was silent for a moment. Senor Torino, I need to be honest. I really need this job. My children. The situation is difficult. But I can't work in fear of being fired at any moment for small accidents. I understand, said Vinny, surprising himself with his own patience. What if I promised to be more reasonable? Would you do that? I'm willing to try. There was a long pause, and Vinny could hear Maria talking quickly in Spanish with someone in the background. All right, senor. Can I start Monday? Monday is perfect. And Maria? Yes, senor. Thank you for giving me a second chance, too. After hanging up, Vinny sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee and wondering what he had just done. In his world, showing weakness or admitting mistakes could be interpreted as vulnerability. But something about the conversation with Maria had felt right. The weekend passed slowly. Vinny spent more time than usual with Anthony, taking him ice skating at Boston Common, and then to lunch at one of his restaurants in North End. During these activities, he carefully observed how his son interacted with other people. The waiter at the restaurant, other children at the skating rink, even strangers on the street. What he saw bothered him. Anthony treated service workers with a coldness that mirrored his own, spoke to other children in a condescending way, and demonstrated a lack of empathy that was disturbing in someone so young. Anthony, said Vinny as they walked home on Sunday afternoon, did you like the waiter at the restaurant today? He was okay, I guess, replied Anthony, kicking a pile of snow. Why? Did you notice how you spoke to him? Anthony seemed confused. I spoke normally. I ordered my food. Did you say please or thank you? The boy thought for a moment. I don't remember. Why does it matter? He's paid to serve us. And that means we shouldn't be polite to him? Dad, you never say please to the waiters at your restaurants. Vinny stopped walking, Anthony's observation hitting him like a punch to the stomach. I don't? No. You just say what you want and they bring it. Because you're the boss. That night, Vinny stayed up late, thinking about the conversation. Anthony was right. He rarely showed basic courtesy to employees, treating them more like extensions of his will than his people. And Anthony had learned to do the same. Monday arrived with a clear, cold sky. At exactly 7 a.m., the doorbell rang. Vinny opened the door to find Maria, wearing the same worn brown coat, but this time carrying a small thermal bag in addition to her usual purse. Good morning, Senor Torino, she said, her voice polite but cautious. Good morning, Maria. Please come in. She entered looking around as if seeing the house for the first time. Senor, I brought some empanadas I made last night. I thought maybe you and your son would like to try them. The offer surprised Vinny. You didn't need to do that. I wanted to, said Maria simply. It's a way of saying thank you for the second chance. Vinny led her to the kitchen, where she placed the thermal bag on the counter. Maria, before we start, I want to establish some new rules. She stiffened slightly. Yes, senor. If you break something, tell me immediately. I won't fire you for honest accidents. If you have questions about how to do something, ask. And if you need a break or aren't feeling well, tell me. Maria looked at him with evident surprise. Senor, are you sure? I am. And Maria, you can call me Mr. Vincent if you want. Senor Torino sounds too formal. A small smile appeared on Maria's face. Thank you, Mr. Vincent. Vinny showed Maria where she had left off the previous week, explaining his expectations in a gentler way than before. She began working in the living room and he went up to his office, but found that he had difficulty concentrating. He kept hearing Maria humming softly while she worked, something none of the previous housekeepers had done. Around 10 a.m., Tony Marcelli arrived for a meeting about the nightclub in Somerville. The owner had accepted Vinny's offer, and they needed to discuss the transition details. The guy wants to close the deal on Friday, reported Tony, but he's nervous about certain implications. What kind of implications? Asked Vinny. He knows we're not just legitimate investors. He's worried about the attention this might bring. Vinny considered the situation. Tell him his fears are unfounded. We're businessmen, nothing more. And Tony? Yes, boss. Be gentle with him. The man is selling his dream, That's not easy. Tony seemed surprised by the instruction, but nodded. Sure, boss. While they discussed the financial details, the sound of something breaking echoed from downstairs. Vinny and Tony looked at each other, and Vinny felt his jaw automatically tighten. But then he remembered his promise to Maria. Continue, he said to Tony. I'll check quickly. He went down the stairs and found Maria in the kitchen, kneeling on the floor collecting pieces of a coffee cup that had broken on the ceramic floor. Mr. Vincent, she said immediately, looking up with evident concern. I'm sorry. I was washing and it slipped from my hands. Vinny looked at the fragments. It was an expensive cup, part of an Italian porcelain set that had cost more than $1,000. His first instinct was to explode, to fire Maria on the spot. But then he remembered his own words. Honest accidents. Are you hurt? He asked. Maria seemed surprised by the question. No, senor, I'm fine. Good. Let me help you clean this up. No, senor, I can... Maria, said Vinny firmly but gently. Let me help. He knelt beside her and began collecting the larger pieces. Maria watched him with evident amazement, clearly not expecting a man like Vincent Torino to kneel on the floor to help clean up a mess. Mr. Vincent, she said softly, you don't need to do this. I know, he replied, continuing to collect the fragments. But I want to. They worked in silence for a few minutes, and Vinny realized he couldn't remember the last time he had done something as simple and human as helping someone clean up a mess. There was something strangely comforting about it. Done, he said, standing up and throwing the pieces in the trash. It wasn't so bad. Thank you, Mr. Vincent, said Maria, her voice loaded with genuine gratitude. You are very kind. Vinny returned to his office, where Tony awaited him with a curious expression. Everything okay, boss? Yes, where were we? You were telling me to be gentle with the club guy, said Tony, still looking confused. Boss, can I ask something? Sure. You're different lately, calmer. Did something happen? Vinny considered the question. Maybe I'm just tired of always being angry. Tony nodded slowly, clearly not understanding completely, but accepting the answer. The meeting ended around noon, and Vinny spent the rest of the morning taking care of paperwork. Around 1 p.m., Maria knocked on the office door. Mr. Vincent, I prepared lunch. I thought maybe you'd like to eat. You don't need to cook for me, Maria. I know, but I like to cook, and you've been very kind to me today. Vinny went down to the kitchen, where Maria had prepared a simple but well-made sandwich, accompanied by a deliciously smelling soup. Chicken soup with vegetables, she explained. My grandmother's recipe. Vinny tasted the soup and was surprised by the rich, comforting flavor. It's delicious. Where did you learn to cook like this? My grandmother taught me when I was little in El Salvador. She used to say that food made with love always tastes better. Your grandmother was wise. Maria smiled. She was. She always said that no matter how little you have, you can always share something with others. While Vinny ate, Maria continued working in the kitchen, cleaning and organizing. He watched her discreetly, noticing how she worked carefully but without fear, softly humming a song in Spanish. Maria, he said suddenly, may I ask about your family? She stopped cleaning and turned to him. Of course, Mr. Vincent. You mentioned 3 children. How are they? Maria's face lit up. Carlos is 16 years old. He's a good boy, but sometimes he hangs out with people who worry me. Sophia is 12 years old, very intelligent, wants to be a doctor. And Miguel is 8 years old, the same age as your Anthony. It must be difficult raising them alone. Sometimes it is, admitted Maria. But they are my life. Everything I do is for them. And their father? Maria was silent for a moment. He left us when Miguel was born. Said 3 children were too many for him. Vinny felt a pang of anger on Maria's behalf, but also a strange admiration for her strength. I'm sorry. You don't need to be sorry, Mr. Vincent. Sometimes people leave us, but that doesn't mean we stop living. It just means we have to be stronger. At 3:30, as always, Anthony arrived from school. Vinny heard the front door open and the familiar sound of the backpack being thrown on the hall floor. Dad, shouted Anthony. Where's my snack? In the kitchen, replied Vinny, coming down the stairs. Anthony entered the kitchen and stopped upon seeing Maria. "Oh, you came back." "Hi, Anthony," said Maria with a warm smile. "I prepared some empanadas. Would you like to try them?" Anthony looked at his father as if asking permission. Vinny nodded. "I guess," said Anthony, his voice polite but cold. Maria served an empanada on a plate and placed it on the table. Anthony bit into it and his eyes widened slightly. "It's good," he admitted. "Thank you," said Maria. "My son Miguel is your age. He loves empanadas too." "Where is he?" asked Anthony. "Still at school. He stays in the after-school program until I get home." Anthony nodded and continued eating, but Vinny could see that he was processing the information. It was rare for Anthony to think about other children who weren't his privileged classmates. "Maria," said Anthony suddenly, "why do you work here?" "Anthony," said Vinny, his voice carrying a warning. "No, it's okay, Mr. Vincent," said Maria. "It's a good question." She turned to Anthony. "I work here because I need to earn money to take care of my children, to buy food, pay rent, buy clothes." "But why don't you have a better job?" asked Anthony, his curiosity genuine. "Anthony," said Vinny again, more firmly. "No, he can ask," said Maria gently. "Anthony, not everyone has the same opportunities. I came to this country to give my children a better life, but that means starting from zero, working hard and saving money. Do you like cleaning houses?" Maria considered the question. "It's not about liking or not liking. It's about doing what I need to do for my family. But I can say that I like working for kind people, like your father." Anthony looked at Vinny, then back at Maria. "My father is kind?" "Very kind," said Maria, smiling at Vinny. "Today he helped me clean when I broke a cup. He didn't need to do that, but he did anyway." Anthony seemed genuinely surprised. "Dad did that?" "He did," confirmed Maria. Vinny observed Anthony's expression, seeing confusion and something that could be admiration in the boy's eyes. It was as if Anthony was seeing his father in a completely new light. "I'm going to do my homework," said Anthony finally, taking his plate to the sink. "Anthony," said Vinny, when the boy was leaving the kitchen. "Yes, Dad." "What do you say to Maria for preparing your snack?" Anthony stopped and turned around. "Thank you, Maria. It was very good." Maria smiled radiantly. "You're welcome, Anthony. Tomorrow I can make something different if you want." After Anthony went upstairs, Maria continued her work while Vinny stayed in the kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper but actually observing her. There was something about Maria's presence that made the house different, warmer, more human. "Mr. Vincent," said Maria while drying the dishes, "may I say something?" "Of course. Anthony is a good boy, intelligent, polite, but he seems lonely, like he doesn't know how to connect with people." Vinny put the newspaper aside. "What do you mean?" "When I asked if he liked empanadas, he didn't know how to respond, as if no one had ever asked his opinion about food before. And when I mentioned my son, he seemed surprised that other children existed. He has classmates at school." "Yes, but they're all like him, aren't they? Rich, privileged. Does he know children who need to work to help their families? Who worry about money? Who have real problems?" Vinny was silent, knowing that Maria was right. Anthony lived in a bubble of privilege, protected from any real difficulty. "Mr. Vincent," continued Maria softly, "I'm not criticizing. I just think that maybe Anthony would benefit from knowing different types of people, from understanding that not everyone lives like he does." "And how do you suggest I do that?" Maria smiled. "Maybe starting small, letting him ask questions, meet different people, showing that kindness is not weakness." That night during dinner, Vinny observed Anthony more carefully than usual. The boy ate in silence, clearly thoughtful. "How was school today?" asked Vinny. "Good," replied Anthony. "Dad, can I ask something?" "Of course." "Why did you help Maria clean the broken cup?" Vinny considered the question carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do. She was working hard, had an accident, and I could help." "But you're the boss. She's paid to clean." "Being the boss doesn't mean I can't help when someone needs it." Anthony chewed thoughtfully. "That's different from what you always did before. Sometimes people change, Anthony. Sometimes we realize we can be better. Do you think I should change too?" The question caught Vinny by surprise. "What do you think?" "I don't know," admitted Anthony. I always thought being strong meant not helping other people, that it was weakness. And now? Now I'm not sure. Maria said you were kind, and she seemed happy when she said that, like kindness was something good. Vinny felt something move in his chest, a mixture of pride and hope. Kindness is something good, Anthony. Maybe it's one of the most important things, even for people like us, especially for people like us. That night, after putting Anthony to bed, Vinny sat in his office, but not to work. Instead, he thought about the day, about the small but significant changes he had made, and about how Anthony had responded. For the first time in years, Vincent Torino felt hopeful about the future, not just about his business or his wealth, but about the kind of man his son could become. And it had all started with a simple decision: to give someone a second chance. Outside, snow continued to fall softly over Boston, covering the city with its temporary purity. But inside the Torino mansion, a much more lasting transformation was beginning to take shape. 2 weeks had passed since Maria returned to work at the Torino mansion, and a comfortable routine had been established. Mornings began with the aroma of fresh coffee and the soft sound of Maria humming while she worked. Vinny discovered that he eagerly awaited these small melodies, which brought a lightness to the house that he didn't know was missing. It was a Thursday in December, and Boston had awakened under a thick layer of fresh snow that transformed North End into a winter postcard. The streets were covered by an immaculate white blanket, and the bare tree branches sparkled with ice crystals that reflected the morning sunlight. Vinny was in his office, reviewing the month's numbers from his restaurants, when he heard Anthony coming down the stairs. The boy had missed school that day due to a mild cold, and Vinny had decided to work from home to keep an eye on him. "Good morning, champ," said Vinny, when Anthony appeared in the office doorway, still in pajamas and with disheveled hair. "Good morning, Dad," replied Anthony, rubbing his eyes. "I'm still feeling kind of strange. Do you want me to ask Maria to prepare soup? She makes excellent chicken soup." Anthony nodded. "That would be good." Vinny went down with Anthony to the kitchen where Maria was preparing dough for homemade bread. She wore a floral apron over her simple clothes, and her hands were covered with flour. "Good morning, Anthony," she said with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better," replied Anthony, sitting at the kitchen table. "Dad said you could make soup." "Of course. I'll prepare my special chicken soup with vegetables. It will make you feel much better." Vinny observed the interaction, noticing how Anthony had become more relaxed with Maria over the past weeks. The boy still maintained a certain formality, but there was genuine curiosity in his eyes when he spoke with her. "Maria," said Anthony, while she began cutting vegetables, "can you tell me about your son Miguel? What does he like to do?" Maria smiled, clearly pleased with Anthony's interest. "Miguel loves soccer. He plays on a school team. He also likes to draw. He's always making drawings of superheroes. Is he good at soccer?" "Very good, but the team doesn't have proper uniforms or good equipment. The children play with what they have." Anthony frowned. "Why don't they buy new uniforms?" "Because it costs money, mijo," explained Maria gently. "Money that families need to use for food and rent." Vinny saw Anthony process this information and could almost see the gears turning in the boy's head. It was a completely foreign concept to Anthony, the idea that some children couldn't have things he considered basic. "I'll leave you two talking," said Vinny. "I have some calls to make." He returned to his office, but left the door ajar so he could hear the conversation in the kitchen. During the next hour, while taking care of business by phone, he heard fragments of the conversation between Anthony and Maria. She told stories about El Salvador, about her journey to the United States, about the challenges of raising 3 children alone. Anthony asked questions, some naive, others surprisingly insightful. Around 11 a.m., Vinny finished his calls and went down to check how Anthony was feeling. As he approached the kitchen, he heard raised voices, something unusual, since Maria always spoke in soft tones. "I told you to bring me a glass of water," Anthony was saying, his voice loaded with irritation. "Why is it taking so long?" Vinny stopped at the kitchen entrance, observing the scene unfolding. Anthony was sitting at the table with his arms crossed and an expression of impatience on his face. Maria was standing near the sink, holding a glass of water, but her posture was tense. "Anthony," said Maria calmly, "I was finishing cutting the vegetables for your soup. Here's your water." "You should have stopped what you were doing when I asked," said Anthony, his voice taking on a tone that Vinny recognized with shock. It was exactly the tone he himself used when he was displeased with employees. "Sorry, mijo," said Maria, placing the glass on the table. "I didn't mean to make you wait. And another thing," continued Anthony, his voice becoming more authoritative, "stop calling me Micho. My name is Anthony. You work for us, so you should call me Mr. Anthony." Vinny felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Anthony's words were like a cruel mirror, reflecting exactly the type of behavior he himself had demonstrated for years. But hearing those words coming from his 8-year-old son's mouth, directed at a woman who had shown only kindness and care, they sounded monstrous. "Anthony," said Maria softly, her voice still patient but with a note of sadness. "I call you Mijo because it's affectionate. It means my son in Spanish. I didn't mean to disrespect." "I'm not your son," said Anthony coldly. "You're our housekeeper. There's a difference." It was at that moment that Vinny saw something that made him act immediately. Tears began to form in Maria's eyes, although she tried to hide them. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned to continue cutting vegetables, and Vinny could see that she was struggling to maintain her composure. "Anthony," said Vinny, entering the kitchen with a voice that made the boy turn immediately. "Hi, Dad," said Anthony, his expression instantly changing to one of innocence. "Maria was making my soup. I heard the conversation," said Vinny, his voice controlled but loaded with an intensity that made Anthony straighten in his chair. "Go to your room now." "But Dad, I was just—" "Now, Anthony." The boy left the kitchen quickly, clearly confused by his father's reaction. Vinny waited until he heard Anthony's footsteps on the stairs before turning to Maria. "Maria, I'm sorry," he said, his voice loaded with genuine shame. Maria quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's okay, Mr. Vincent. He's just a child." "No, it's not okay," said Vinny firmly. "What he said was unacceptable, and I know exactly where he learned to talk like that." Maria looked at him with surprise. "Mr. Vincent, he learned from me, Maria. Every cruel word, every demonstration of superiority, he learned by watching how I treat people." Vinny sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. "God, what kind of monster have I created?" "He's not a monster," said Maria softly, sitting across from Vinny. "He's a child who is learning, and children can learn new things. You heard how he spoke to you, as if you were less than human." "Yes, I heard, and it hurt," admitted Maria. "But Mr. Vincent, you've changed. In the past weeks, I've seen you become kinder, more human. If you can change, Anthony can too." Vinny looked at Maria, admiring her ability to forgive and see good, even after being treated so poorly. "How do you do it? How do you keep faith in people after everything you've been through?" Maria smiled sadly. "Because the alternative is to become bitter, and bitterness doesn't help anyone, especially my children. They need to see that it's possible to be strong and kind at the same time. I need to talk to Anthony." "Yes, you do. But Mr. Vincent, when you talk to him, remember that he's only 8 years old. He doesn't fully understand what his words mean." Vinny nodded and went up the stairs to Anthony's room. He found the boy sitting on his bed, playing with a portable video game, apparently unconcerned about what had happened. "Anthony, turn that off. We need to talk." Anthony turned off the game and looked at his father with a cautious expression. "Am I in trouble?" "Yes, you are. But more importantly, we need to talk about how you treated Maria." "I didn't do anything wrong," said Anthony defensively. "I just told her to bring me water and stop calling me strange names." "Anthony, sit here," said Vinny, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm going to tell you a story about your grandmother, Rosa." Anthony sat next to his father, his curiosity aroused. Vinny rarely spoke about his mother. "When I was your age, we were very poor," began Vinny. "Your grandmother worked as a housekeeper for rich families, just like Maria works for us. She cleaned their houses, cooked their meals, took care of their children. Like Maria does with us?" "Exactly like Maria does with us. And do you know how some of those families treated your grandmother?" Anthony shook his head. They spoke to her as if she were invisible, as if she had no feelings, as if she were less important because she cleaned houses instead of owning them. Anthony was silent, processing the information. "Your grandmother would come home crying sometimes," continued Vinny, his voice becoming softer. "Not because the work was hard, but because people treated her as if she didn't matter." "That's sad," said Anthony, his voice small. "It's very sad. And today, when I heard you speak to Maria, it was exactly how those families spoke to your grandmother." Anthony looked at his father with wide eyes. "I made Maria feel like Grandma Rosa felt." "Yes, you did. I saw tears in her eyes, Anthony. Tears because an 8-year-old boy treated her as if she were less important than him." Anthony was silent for a long moment, looking at his hands. "I didn't want to make her cry. I know you didn't want to. But your words have power, Anthony. They can hurt people even when you don't intend to hurt." "Dad," said Anthony slowly, "is that how you always treated the housekeepers?" The question hit Vinny like an arrow. "Yes," he admitted, "and it was wrong. Very wrong. So I learned wrong." "You learned what I taught you, but what I taught you was wrong." Anthony thought about this for a moment. "Can I learn new things?" "Of course you can, and we'll learn together." "What should I have done differently with Maria?" Vinny smiled, proud of his son's question. "Well, first, you could have said please when you asked for water. Second, you could have thanked her when she brought it. And third, when she called you Micho, you could have asked what it meant instead of assuming it was disrespectful." "And what does it mean?" "It means my son in Spanish. It's an affectionate way of speaking. Like when I call you champ." Anthony seemed genuinely surprised. She was being affectionate with me? "Very affectionate. Maria likes you, Anthony. She talks about you with the same affection she talks about her own children. She has children. 3, 1 your age, named Miguel." Anthony was silent for a long moment. "Dad, can I apologize to Maria?" "I think that would be a good idea." They went down together to the kitchen, where Maria was finishing preparing the soup. She looked up when they entered, her expression cautious. "Maria," said Anthony, his voice small but clear, "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't know that Mijo was affectionate, and I should have said please and thank you." Maria knelt down to be at Anthony's eye level. "Thank you for apologizing, mijo. I accept your apology. Can I ask you a question about Miguel?" "Of course you can. Would he like to play soccer with me someday? I have a new ball I've never used." Maria's face lit up. "He would love that. But Anthony, are you sure?" "I'm sure. And Maria?" "Yes." "You can keep calling me Micho. I like it." Maria smiled and hugged Anthony gently. "Thank you, mijo. Now how about trying this soup?" While Anthony had his soup, Vinny observed the interaction between his son and Maria. There was a lightness in Anthony that he hadn't seen in a long time, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. And Maria, despite having been hurt earlier, treated Anthony with the same kindness as always. "Maria," said Vinny, "on Saturday, why don't you bring Miguel to play with Anthony? They could play soccer in the garden." "Mr. Vincent, are you sure? I don't want to bother." "It wouldn't be a bother. It would be a pleasure." Anthony looked at his father with evident admiration. "Thank you, Dad. It's going to be fun." That afternoon, while Anthony rested and Maria finished her work, Vinny reflected on the day's events. Seeing his son repeat his own toxic behaviors had been like looking in a distorted mirror, revealing not only who Anthony was becoming, but who he himself had been for so many years. But there was also hope. Anthony had been able to recognize his mistake, apologize genuinely, and express a desire to change. If an 8-year-old child could do that, surely a 45-year-old man could too. "Mr. Vincent," said Maria, appearing in the office doorway, "I'm finishing for today. Anthony is sleeping." "Maria, thank you for everything, for your patience with Anthony, for helping me see." "You don't need to thank me," she interrupted softly. "Families help each other, and you've become my family here." After Maria left, Vinny went up to check on Anthony. The boy was sleeping deeply, his face relaxed and peaceful. Vinny sat in the chair next to the bed, watching his son and thinking about the future. For the first time in years, Vincent Torino felt hopeful, not just about his business or his wealth, but about the kind of man his son could become, and about the kind of man he himself could still become. Outside, snow continued to fall over Boston, covering past mistakes with the promise of a new beginning. And inside the Torino mansion, father and son were learning together that it's never too late to change, never too late to be better. The fourth chapter of transformation had ended, but the journey was just beginning. Saturday arrived with a crystal blue sky and a surprisingly mild temperature for December in Boston. The snow that had fallen during the week still covered the Torino mansion's garden, creating a perfect field for soccer. Vinny woke earlier than usual, feeling a mixture of nervousness and expectation that he hadn't experienced in years. Anthony had spent the entire morning preparing for Miguel's visit. He organized his toys, carefully chose which soccer ball to use, opting for an older one instead of the new one, so Miguel won't feel bad, and even asked to help Vinny prepare snacks for the children. "Dad," said Anthony while arranging cushions on the living room sofa, "do you think Miguel will like me?" "Why wouldn't he?" asked Vinny, observing the genuine anxiety on his son's face. "Because I've never had a friend who doesn't have the same things I have." Vinny stopped arranging the snacks and knelt in front of Anthony. "Anthony, Miguel is a child just like you. He likes soccer, drawing, having fun. Those are the things that matter for making friends. What if I say something wrong, like I did with Maria?" "Then you apologize and learn. That's how we grow." At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Vinny opened the door to find Maria accompanied by a thin 8-year-old boy with dark hair and bright eyes full of curiosity. Miguel wore clean but worn jeans and a winter coat that had clearly been used by other children before him. "Mr. Vincent," said Maria, "this is my son Miguel." "Hello, Miguel," said Vinny, crouching down to greet the boy. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Anthony is very excited to play with you." Miguel looked around the entrance hall with wide eyes, clearly impressed by the grandeur of the house. "Wow," he murmured in English with a Spanish accent. "It's like a palace." Anthony appeared at the top of the stairs and came down quickly. "Hi, are you Miguel?" "Sí, yes," replied Miguel a bit shy. "Do you want to see my room first, or would you prefer to play soccer in the garden?" Miguel looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Soccer? Perfect! I have a great ball." Vinny watched the two boys run out to the back garden, followed by Maria. He positioned himself at the kitchen window, from where he could observe the children playing. Initially, there was a certain formality between the boys. Anthony was clearly trying to be polite, but didn't know exactly how to interact with someone from such a different background. Miguel, in turn, was visibly impressed by the spacious and well-maintained garden, so different from the small concrete patio where he usually played. "Anthony is being very kind," commented Maria, joining Vinny at the window. "He's trying. I can see he's nervous." "Miguel, too. He's never been in a house like this." They watched as Anthony showed Miguel different areas of the garden: the gazebo, the ornamental fountain, even the small vegetable garden that Maria had started tending. Gradually, the initial tension began to dissipate. "Mira!" shouted Miguel suddenly, kicking the ball with impressive technique that made it fly in a perfect arc to Anthony. "Wow!" exclaimed Anthony, clearly impressed. "How did you do that?" "Mi papá me enseñó." "My father taught me," said Miguel, then correcting himself to English. Before he went away, Anthony caught the ball and tried to imitate Miguel's movement, but the ball flew uncontrollably into the bushes. Instead of getting frustrated, he laughed. "Can you teach me?" "Claro, of course." For the next hour, Vinny and Maria watched the two boys playing together. Miguel taught Anthony soccer techniques he had learned on the streets of East Boston, while Anthony shared his toys and showed Miguel parts of the house. The difference in their backgrounds became less and less important as they discovered common interests. "Mr. Vincent," said Maria softly, "may I say something?" "Of course." "In the past weeks, I've seen a change in Anthony. He's becoming more human, more connected." "Do you think so?" "Yes. Before he seemed like a child trying to be an adult. Now he's acting like a real child." Vinny considered Maria's words. She was right. Anthony had been carrying a weight he shouldn't carry, trying to imitate his father's hardness instead of developing his own personality. Around 4 p.m., the children came in for a snack. Vinny had prepared sandwiches, fruits, and cookies, and served chocolate milk for both boys. "Miguel," said Anthony while they ate, "do you want to see my baseball card collection?" "You collect cards?" "Yes, I have some very rare ones. Want to see?" They went up to Anthony's room, and Vinny could hear their animated voices coming from upstairs. Maria smiled, clearly satisfied to see her son having fun. "Maria," said Vinny suddenly, "may I ask something personal?" "Of course, Mr. Vincent. Have you ever regretted coming to the United States, leaving your family in El Salvador?" Maria thought for a moment. "Sometimes I miss home, but when I see Miguel laughing like he's laughing now, I know I made the right choice. Here he has opportunities he would never have there. It must have been very difficult making that journey alone with 3 children." "It was. But you do what you need to do for your children, don't you? Just like you're doing now." "What do you mean?" "You're changing, not just for yourself, but for Anthony. You're giving him something that money can't buy." "And what's that?" "Compassion, empathy, the ability to see other people as human beings, not just as objects to use or discard." Vinny was silent, absorbing Maria's words. She was right. He was changing, and this change was affecting Anthony in ways he was just beginning to understand. The children came down again, this time with Anthony carrying a box of baseball cards. "Dad," said Anthony excitedly, "Miguel knows all the players. He knows more about baseball than I do." "Is that true?" asked Vinny, smiling at Miguel. "I really like baseball," said Miguel shyly. "I watch games on TV with my brothers." "Miguel," said Anthony suddenly, "do you want to stay for dinner? Dad makes the best lasagna." Miguel looked at his mother hopefully. "Can I, Mama? If Mr. Vincent doesn't mind." "It would be a pleasure," said Vinny. "Actually, why don't you stay too, Maria? We can have a family dinner." Maria seemed surprised. "Mr. Vincent, I don't want to bother." "It wouldn't be a bother. It would be nice." While Vinny prepared dinner, with occasional help from Maria, the children continued playing. Anthony showed Miguel his video games, his books, his toys. But what impressed Vinny most was how Anthony began asking questions about Miguel's life, about his school, his siblings, his dreams. "Miguel," Vinny heard Anthony ask, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a professional soccer player, or maybe a doctor, like my sister Sophia wants to be." "That's cool. I never thought about what I want to be." No. I always thought I'd be like my dad, doing business. But now I'm not sure." "Why not?" "Because I want to do something that helps people, like your mother helps our family, or like doctors help sick people." Vinny stopped stirring the lasagna sauce, touched by his son's words. Anthony was developing a social conscience that Vinny had never tried to cultivate. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally. Miguel told stories about El Salvador that his mother had told him. Anthony talked about his school and teachers, and Maria shared memories of her own childhood. Vinny found himself laughing more than he had laughed in months. "Mr. Vincent," said Miguel suddenly, "thank you for inviting me to your house. It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen." "Thank you, Miguel. But do you know what makes a house really beautiful?" "What?" "The people who are in it. And today, with you and your mother here, our house is more beautiful than ever." Maria smiled, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. After dinner, while the children watched a movie in the living room, Vinny and Maria cleaned the kitchen together. "Mr. Vincent," said Maria, "thank you for today. Miguel hasn't stopped talking about Anthony since we arrived. He's never had a friend like him. Anthony hasn't either. Actually, I think Anthony has never had a real friend, period. Why? Because I raised him to believe he was superior to other children, that friendship was weakness, that he should only associate with people who could benefit him somehow. And now I see how wrong I was. Seeing Anthony with Miguel today, I see the kind of child he really is, underneath all the hardness I taught him. He's a good child, Mr. Vincent. He just needed the chance to be a child." When it was time for Maria and Miguel to leave, Anthony was visibly sad. "Can Miguel come back next week?" he asked. "If his mother agrees," said Vinny. "See, yes," exclaimed Miguel. "Can I bring my sister Sophia too? She's very smart." "Of course. said Anthony. "I want to meet your whole family." While Maria and Miguel prepared to leave, Anthony ran to his room and came back with a box. "Miguel," he said, "I want you to have this." Miguel opened the box to reveal a collection of rare baseball cards, including some worth hundreds of dollars. "Anthony, I can't accept this," said Miguel, looking at his mother. "Please," insisted Anthony. "You know more about baseball than I do. They'll be happier with you." Maria looked at Vinny, who nodded encouragingly. "If Anthony wants to give it, you can accept," she said to Miguel. Miguel hugged Anthony tightly. "Thank you, friend. You're the best friend I've ever had." "You too," replied Anthony, and Vinny could see that he really meant it. After Maria and Miguel left, Vinny and Anthony sat in the living room, both still processing the day. "Dad," said Anthony, "can I ask something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you let me have friends like Miguel before?" Vinny took a deep breath. "Because I was wrong about many things. I thought protecting you meant keeping you separate from different people. But actually, I was preventing you from learning about the real world. Miguel is really cool, and he knows so many things I don't know." "Like what?" "How to be happy, even when you don't have much money. How to take care of family. How to be brave when things are difficult." Vinny felt a lump in his throat. "Those are very important lessons. Dad, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. Today was the best day I've ever had. Not because of the toys or the big house, but because I finally felt like I had a real friend." That night, after putting Anthony to bed, Vinny sat in his office, but not to work. Instead, he thought about the day, about the changes he had witnessed in his son, and about the changes he felt in himself. For the first time in his adult life, Vincent Torino felt truly proud, not of his wealth, not of his power, but of the man he was becoming and the son he was raising. He picked up the phone and dialed his sister Sophia's number. "Vinny," she said, surprised by the call. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is great, Sophia. Better than it's been in years." "You sound different. Lighter." "I am different, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For reminding me of Mama's words about children being like sponges." "Oh, Vinny, what happened?" Vinny told Sophia about the past weeks, about Maria, about the changes in Anthony, about the day they had just had. "I'm proud of you," said Sophia when he finished. "Mama would be proud too." "Do you really think so?" "I'm sure of it. She always said that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give." After hanging up, Vinny went up to check on Anthony one last time. The boy was sleeping deeply, but there was a smile on his face, something Vinny hadn't seen in a long time. On Anthony's nightstand, Vinny noticed a drawing the boy had made during the afternoon. It was a simple figure of two children playing soccer, with the words "my friends" written on top in childish letters. Vinny smiled, knowing he had finally given Anthony something money couldn't buy: the ability to form genuine human connections, to see beyond superficial differences, to find joy in the simplicity of friendship. 3 months later, the Torino mansion had become a very different place. Miguel visited regularly, sometimes bringing his sister Sophia, who quickly became a positive influence on Anthony with her passion for studies and dreams of becoming a doctor. Maria was no longer just a housekeeper. She had become part of the family, offering advice about child rearing and sharing her wisdom about life and relationships. Vinny had also made changes in his businesses. He began treating his employees with more respect, offered better salaries and benefits, and even established a scholarship fund for employees' children who wanted to go to college. Anthony flourished under this new dynamic. His grades improved. He became more popular at school, not through intimidation, but through genuine kindness, and developed a real interest in helping others. He began doing volunteer work at a local shelter and even convinced Vinny to donate sports equipment to Miguel's soccer team. One spring evening, while Vinny and Anthony dined together, the boy made an observation that perfectly summarized the transformation they had both undergone. "Dad," said Anthony, "do you remember when you used to say that respect comes through fear?" "I remember. I think you were wrong. I think real respect comes through love." Vinny smiled, knowing his son had learned a lesson that had taken him decades to understand. "You're right, champ. You're absolutely right. Outside, Boston awakened to another spring day, full of possibilities and promises. And inside the Torino mansion, a father and son had discovered that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts or demonstrations of power, but in the ability to love, to forgive, and to see the humanity in every person they met. Vincent Torino's legacy had changed forever. Instead of leaving Anthony an empire built on fear and intimidation, he was leaving something much more valuable: the wisdom that real strength comes from compassion, and that true success is measured not by what you accumulate, but by the good you do in the world. And it had all started with a simple decision: to give someone a second chance, and in the process, give himself the chance to become the man he should have always been.